vortex or pocket. In other words, when the blade starts moving into new water, as it were, or towards the boat itself, it's getting caught. The water fills in that hole, and you just see very clearly that the blade gets caught. And most people don't recognize that their blade is getting caught because every single release they've ever made has been too long because they've been told to drive their elbows through their body. And so they just figured that wrestling the ore out of the water is the way it's supposed to come out. And it will jump out of the water. It's so interesting. Once the blade gets to around 35 degrees, it starts to come out. And that pretty much is the point that the blade begins to move towards the finish line at the end of the drive. And that movement towards the finish line is going to draw the blade up out of the water. So, as this clever Florida Rowing Center student said, leave when the party's over.
Love it. Now we're going to hear briefly from our sponsors. The Coxmate AA Plus is the latest value Cox amplifier on the market. The coxswain needs 3 things when she's running an outing: clear audio to talk to the crew, secondly, clear information on rating and time, and thirdly, the security of knowing the battery will last the whole outing. You can get all of this from the newly remodeled Coxmate AA Plus. Taking advantage of electronics reducing in price, Coxmate is passing on the savings to you, the customer. The new AA Plus is the same price as the old audio-only AA, but now it has rating and timing added. This replaces the mid-range unit and simplifies the Coxmate products for coxes. There are 2. The Coxmate AA Plus with audio rate and time, and the Coxmate SX, which is still the only amplifier with GPS speed measurement. Win yourself a Coxmate AA Plus by entering our free competition. Find the web link on Facebook, search for Row Perfect UK, or go to the website news page rowperfect.co.uk/news. Entries close on the 30th of March 2015. Now back to Gordon Hamilton. Gordon, have you got any training recommendations for rowers with asthma?
Well, I mean, they need to talk to their doctor, but I've worked with a number of people who have asthma, and if they take an inhaler, my advice is make sure you bring it, because I can't tell you the number of times I've had an athlete who said, "Oh my God, I forgot my inhaler." That's, you learn to work within your capabilities. Everybody has some sort of issues that they have to work with, and just be mindful of them and remember to bring your inhaler. That's all I can, talk to a doctor. Although, unfortunately, very few doctors understand the demands of rowing. But that's about it seems a pretty simple advice, but I'm amazed at how often it's not taken.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to a little bit of focus on higher level skills and people who are training for racing. How does stroke pace in racing work with your sculling technique?
Now, is this my particular technique or
yes.
one's technique?
I think it's your technique.
Okay. Stroke pace in racing. Well, I think that what I'm working for in our technique, my technique, is making you connected to the boat totally, as though you were a piece of equipment. And if you're working on the pins, then the recovery time is related to the speed of the boat. And in addition, you will find that if you really pay attention to keeping the elbows in front of the body, your release will be more or less in the right place, that is, right when the party's over. right when the pocket begins, the blade begins to leave the pocket. And if you, the difference between, say, rowing 26 strokes a minute, or rather 28 strokes a minute, as opposed to rowing 26 strokes a minute, is in the course of a stroke, is only, and that is very often the result of being too long at the back end. In addition, you're slowing the rate down, the boat down, by being too long and getting caught and not moving the boat all the way through the drive, because you've entered a part of the drive that isn't effective, and you're actually slowing the boat down there. So I think that, you know, being, yes, noticeably shorter at the release end of the drive, it has to feel that way. It's going to feel short, but you will get out on time, and that will help the rating relate to the speed of the boat. There's a great drill, that I call running downhill, and you start off rowing, I'd say, you know, 20, 22, 23 strokes a minute at full pressure, and your goal is to go up 1 beat every stroke. You need a speed coach or some sort of piece of equipment, computer, to give you both rating and speed. And every stroke, you try to go up a rating, 1 beat, and a little bit of increase in the speed. And you keep doing this until one of two things happen. Either the speed stops going up, or the rating stops going up for 3 strokes. And you're going to find that after you get to like 26, 27 strokes a minute, you can only go up half a beat. But that's fine. You're still going up. The rating is still going up. And so you just watch when both the speed and the rating stop going up, or one or the other. I guess it's all right if the speed keeps going up. But you stop and sort of reevaluate, well, what went wrong? And certainly, you need to understand that what went wrong was at the 2 transition points. Either at the back end, you got too rushed or hurried to get out of the water, focused on trying to get the rating up, or at the front end, you rushed the entry by slamming onto the feet. Either one of those 2 areas, and you just refocus on that, and you will realize that's where you're losing your speed, that's where you're losing your rating, that's where the 2 things become disconnected. And I think that what you need to focus on is you're taking the rating up, rather than just pushing the hands away or trying to jump sooner onto the front end at the entry, is there's an expression which fits very nicely into this, and that is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so when you're connected to the boat, everything slows down. It's a classic example of, as they say, being in the zone. And in rowing, it's really quite simple. It's being a part of the boat. You don't have to hit a ball. You don't have to do all these other movements. You just move with the boat.
Very, very nice. I want to go try that exercise immediately. You say, Gordon, that rowing is a simple concept, be on time. Why is this essential?
It's an expression I've used to try to simplify, but I think it doesn't simplify. It serves as an expression of the desired outcome, especially for the recovery, but also for the drive. Because when you're truly structurally connected to the pins in a relationship of sort of neutrality, that is, as a piece of equipment moving with the speed of the boat, then there aren't issues of, and I think using the whole term slide control is rather pernicious as far as your ability to relate to the boat, because it's putting you in a position of authority when really you want to be part of the boat, not sort of demanding things of it that it isn't necessarily going to do. So you don't want to be thinking, oh, should I be faster on the slide or slower on the slide? All you want to do is move with the pins of the boat with structural integrity, And there's no need to think of ratio, fast or slow. You simply be with the boat, and you're drawing yourself up the slide by separation of the arms, not pulling against the boat with your feet, making the recovery 100% from the upper body. You can go in the water anytime you want, and you will be on time. It's this idea that, oh, there's a ratio where there's, you know, I have to go slower, or I have to go, no, that's what I mean, you just be on time.
That sounds...
When you're connected, yeah, that's pretty much sums it up.
I can see why you have challenges getting people to understand that, based on the answer to the previous question when you were explaining about slow is smooth and smooth is fast. When you want to be on time, people try to rush to anticipate the timeliness of the particular part of the stroke, and of course that's undermining your expression of being on time, not anticipating the timing.
Exactly. And so it's an outcome that has to come from really proper technique, I think.
It does. Now, how do you coach athletes to maintain soft hands throughout the stroke?
Soft hands is perhaps the very last thing I think that people finally begin to understand. One of the things that I really stress is you do not apply, you know, I've been talking about applying pressure against the pin, and a lot of coaches talk about apply lateral pressure against the pin and use your thumbs to do that. Your thumbs are not designed for that kind of a movement, and if you do apply any serious pressure against the pin with your thumbs, you'll be visiting an occupational therapist. They just don't work that way. The pressure comes from the elbows, and it comes from the elbows, not the thumbs. I'm getting a little lost. Can you repeat that?
Oh, the question was about maintaining soft hands.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so as I say, the hands don't have to grip the handles hard. The pressure from the hands comes from the padding below the pinky, friction on the oar handle, but most of the pressure is coming from the elbows pushing into the pins. And you can sort of think of your eyes being on your elbows, and the elbows are always looking at the pins and pressing into the pins, not the hands. This takes a lot of time, but it becomes more and more important as you get more sensitive to the feel of the blade on the water.
Yeah, I had a coach who said you want the grip on the handle to be as if you were holding a small kitten or a bird.
Or a sparrow, exactly. However, I mean, that is one of the hardest things to achieve, because I think most everything else has to be in place. You tend to think of your structure starting in your hands, and it doesn't. It starts from your core, and the hands are just the weakest part of the whole system, and they're not, the blade is not an extension of your hands. There you're going to be sort of gripping too hard. The blade is a piece of the equipment just as you are, and it's connected really to your lumbar spine, not the hands. So it takes time, but it's really worth pursuing. But, you know, I think that there's a time for it. You can't begin thinking of soft hands until you have your structure and stability.
Good point. Now, someone's asking, should I work out before, after, or not at all on a racing rowing day?
Well, you need a good warm-up, that's for sure. I think people sometimes are afraid to really do a warm-up because they think it'll impact their ability to perform at the highest level. So you need, and you should have a warm-up that you're accustomed to doing, that you know gets you where you need to be at the starting line. A simple warm-up that I've often found effective is just 10 minutes. You can either do it if it's a rough condition or something and you know it's sort of chaotic out on the course. You can do it on an ergometer and then launch your boat, but you can do something like 10 minutes at 25%, 3 minutes at 50%, 2 minutes at 75%, 1 minute at full percent, and you'll be warmed up. but after, that's fine, after the race, but I wouldn't do any real hard work on a race day.
Nicely put. Now we've got some high school questions, and this is not just exclusively applied to high school, but how do you motivate high school women's crews to apply more pressure?
Well, I mean, I think the gender differences are diminishing as junior rowers that become more and more competitive, and junior girls have moved along, so it's no longer, I don't think there's any longer this big divide in the way boys and girls approach the sport. But I think you could, obviously on an ergometer, you can have games, competitive games, where individual performance really matters, and on an ergometer, that's all that matters, is how hard you're willing to hurt yourself. And then I think you start, if it's a team boat, you just start to stress accountability both to yourself and to the team. And I think people relate to that, and when they realize that every little particle of the process matters, and add some competitive games that everybody can have a way to improve. I think on an ergometer, there's a lot of potential for this sort of thing. One thing that I used to do when I was coaching that sort of concerned about racing, preparation, that sort of thing, you line everybody up in a line on an ergometer based primarily on their erg score for whatever period of time you're doing, whatever interval, say 3-minute piece. You'd do a 3-minute piece, and you'd have the best time at the far right and the slowest time at the left, and then each piece that you did thereafter, you move people around depending on what their score was. So even the people at the very bottom can have some competitive motivation. I think that's important to keep their position on the team and let them see how they can improve individually.
Very nice. Now, what mental techniques do you use with rowers to get more and more personal records, or personal bests as we call them in the UK?
This is a very good one. And I think obviously the mental techniques are clearly, dealing with pain is the biggest inhibitor. And it's one of the most significant indicators of the probability of success. So I think that you really want to address how people deal with discomfort. The first one is obviously motivation. And that's just, you see the champions and they deal with it. Others, there are, individual strategies for dealing with pain or discomfort. And they break down into some pretty concrete categories. One group of people will focus on the distress. That is, they dive into it and they explore it and they sort of embrace it. You need to address these issues, I think, through training and talk about them. Another method people have for dealing with discomfort, and that's what personal bests are all about, if they focus on something else, not necessarily ignore it, but redirect their attention to something else that doesn't hurt. For example, your breathing. I think focusing on your breathing is a good distraction for pain. But I think the real champions develop a strategy for ignoring it. As sort of, we can look at Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia, as he said, I think it was the trick William Potter is not minding that it hurts. And of course, some, when they're trying to ignore it, end up just backing off, but champions don't. And I think that this really is a very big part of rowing, because dealing with pain and discomfort is huge. There's a fellow who really helped my thinking on this, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and his main point, he worked with people with terminal illnesses and chronic pain, and he worked with me when I was at MIT in dealing with this issue. And his points were that the distress isn't the major problem. Rather, it's the fear that you are not going to be able to continue to tolerate it into the future. It's reminiscent, of course, and your British listeners might not be as familiar with this, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 1933 inauguration speech, when he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And it goes back to Greek Stoicism. It's not the pain that's to be dreaded, but the fear of the pain. And I think what people need to understand is that you must embrace it in the present moment. You recognize that thoughts about the future or future pain or anything about the future will just cost you energy. And they're not relevant to the present moment experience or winning or personal best. When the thoughts are being seen as just thoughts and not as facts, you're at least for that moment sort of liberated from the tyrannical, distracting, and disempowering narrative and the energy drain that ensues. So you realize that all your job is to take care of this moment, and then the next moment, and then the next moment. And it's always now, always this moment, not looking into the future. There's a friend of mine whose daughter works at a Starbucks, which happens to be this incredibly busy Starbucks. And I mean, it's a conveyor belt line from the time they open up at like 5:30 in the morning until they close, whenever that is. And I once asked her how she dealt with it, her daughter, how she dealt with this long, unending line. And she very, very wisely said, I don't look down the line.
Yes.
And that's and that's what your approach has to be when you're dealing with distress, mental or physical. You can't look down the line. You just I'm dealing with this now. This is my job. And the next moment and the next moment.
Gordon, that's a fantastic insight, and I hope that gives the questioner something good to march on forwards with. We're coming through to the end of our Rowing Chat hour, but I'd like to ask you one final question. What does a coach do that makes the most difference to athlete performance?
That pretty much sums up the job of a coach, isn't it? All coaches, I think, good coaches have different strengths. Some of them are great motivators. Some of them are brilliant technicians. Some of them are just inspirational. But I think that really it's attention to detail. I've traveled around to a lot of different boathouses and seen a lot of different programs. And you can walk into the boathouse and you get a very quick idea of the likelihood of the success of that program. And when you go into a boathouse where you see all the weights taken care of, the ergs in the right places, or ergos as you fellows say, and just that, and a view that everything matters. When that attitude goes through the whole boathouse, that's what makes a difference in performance. And in addition, sort of accountability. And so it's both personal accountability and to your team accountability. And accountability for the details and for your own personal behavior. And I think that the coach needs to understand that success is a very, very personal thing. And that it matters really only to the team or the individual and the coach, but beyond that, it really doesn't matter very much. And when you look at it that way, that's what the coach's job is, to improve performance. When you look at what success really is, as such, it's really within everyone's reach. By no means guaranteed, but within their reach. and that in that way you can lose fear of failure and just take account of how you've behaved, what matters, and everything matters. I think that's what needs to be instilled. And honestly, I've walked in at Cambridge, I've walked into that boathouse when they've had brilliant coaches who really recognized that every detail mattered, and you walked in there and it was very clean, and you'd see the athletes walk in and they were respectful and, you know, purposeful and mindful of everything that was going on. And then I've been there in years when there was another coach there who was a little more laid back, and you just go, uh-oh, you know, and you can see the results.
It's interesting, isn't it? We have a challenge at the moment in a masters club, which I'm in, where we have some athletes who want to race and some who do not want to race, some who are beginners and some who are lifetime rowers and very, very experienced. And the definition of success is actually what enables the club to be successful, because we all try to achieve for whatever you versus me versus the next man wants their personal success to be. But I very much respect your definition of the underlying committedness to the principles and the purpose of being there.
Yep.
Gordon,
thanks.
It's been an absolute delight having you as my guest here on Rowing Chat, and you very kindly offered our listeners a copy of your book, Sculling in a Nutshell, as a prize draw, and a reminder to listeners that if you want to be in to win a copy of Gordon's book, you must be subscribed to the Row Perfect newsletter. The newsletter subscription is on the website rowperfect.co.uk/news. On the right hand side there's a little box and you can sign up there. Each month we draw a prize from random selection, and it genuinely is random, from all of the subscribers, and each week you get a summary of educational rowing articles that will help you enjoy the sport more, bring you new challenges and new opportunities. Now, Gordon, would you like to let the listeners know where they can connect with you?
Sure. They can connect to me through the Florida Rowing Center at floridarowingcenter.com, or actually my email address, gham@mit.edu. Those will work. And thanks, Rebecca, for having me.
It's been an absolute delight. Thank you to all the listeners. Welcome to new ones. We re-welcome old ones. And we'll see you all next time in a month on Rowing Chat.